Evening. A grand charity gala inside a historic Paris hotel. Warm golden light reflects off polished marble floors, silk dresses, expensive cologne, and the soft hum of a string quartet fill the air. Daniel Laurent, a 41-year-old single father, stands at the edge of the ballroom. He doesn't belong here. He's only here to fix a malfunctioning sound system. As he checks the wires, the room goes silent. A woman descends the grand staircase. Isabella Moreau, the 26-year-old CEO of a fashion empire. Her white dress is stunning, a masterpiece of silk. She walks straight to him and whispers, "Can you stay next to me?" Daniel Laurent was a man who lived in the invisible frequencies of the world. At 41, his face was a map of quiet focus and the weary resilience of a man who understood that the most important sounds are often the ones no one notices. He was an audio systems engineer, a master of acoustics who could tell you if a room was bleeding sound just by snapping his fingers. Years ago, Daniel was the lead technician for major international music festivals, traveling from London to Tokyo, managing massive soundscapes for thousands of people. He remembered the roar of 50,000 fans at Wembley, the electric surge of power as the first bass note hit, and the intoxicating feeling of controlling the heartbeat of a stadium. But today, the heavy flight cases and the constant travel were a distant memory. He had walked away from the high-stakes industry for a much smaller, much more vital project. His 9-year-old daughter, Elise. Daniel was a single father. After his wife, Sarah, passed away, the roar of the stadium crowd suddenly sounded hollow. It was as if the world had gone out of phase. He realized that he was winning at his career, but losing the only person who truly needed him to be present. He remembered coming home from a 3-week tour to find Elise clutching a photo of him, crying because she had forgotten what his voice sounded like. He resigned from his global firm within a week. He traded the prestige of a director title for a life defined by school runs, grocery lists, and Sunday mornings spent at the local park in the 11th arrondissement. Their life was modest but full of a quiet, rhythmic peace. They lived in a small apartment filled with books and old vinyl records. The scent of their home was a comforting mix of old paper, vanilla, and the faint metallic tang of motor oil from his toolkit. To the world of the Paris elite, Daniel was a ghost. He was the man in the dark t-shirt and work trousers who arrived through the service entrance, fixed the feedback loop in the speakers, and vanished before the first bottle of champagne was uncorked. He was perfectly content with his invisibility. He saw the wealthy and the powerful through the lens of a technician, observing their stress, their performative smiles, and the frantic energy they poured into maintaining an image that felt as fragile as glass. On this particular evening, Daniel was working at the Hôtel de Crillon. A high-profile fundraiser was underway, and the organizers had called him in a panic because the primary audio bridge was flickering. He had spent the last 2 hours in the shadows behind the stage, his hands deep in a maze of fiber optic cables and signal processors. He was exhausted, his back ached, and his only thought was finishing the job so he could get back to Elise. He had promised her they would watch a documentary about the deep sea tonight. As the guests began to arrive, Daniel moved to the edge of the grand ballroom to check the levels one last time. He felt absurdly out of place. He was surrounded by tailored tuxedos and gowns that cost more than his annual rent. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the sharp metallic tang of cold silver. He was the only person in the room who wasn't there to be seen. He was there to ensure that the voices of others carried properly through the air, even if those voices had nothing of substance to say. He checked his watch. 8:15 p.m. Elise would be finishing dinner with his neighbor. He reached into his pocket to check for any messages, and that was when the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a sudden, heavy vacuum of attention. Isabella Moreau had entered the room. At 26, Isabella was the CEO of Moreau Couture, a legacy fashion house she had revitalized with a ruthless, brilliant vision. She was the ice queen of the Parisian fashion scene, untouchable, perfectly poised, and notoriously private. As she walked down the red-carpeted stairs, her white silk dress caught the light of the chandeliers, making her look like a shard of fallen star. Every eye in the room was on her, Every photographer angled for a shot. Daniel looked up, but he wasn't looking at her dress or her face. He was looking at the small wireless receiver clipped to the back of the nearby pillar. He noticed a faint amber light flickering, a sign that the interference was returning. He moved toward the equipment rack near the base of the stairs, focused entirely on the machine. He didn't know that the most powerful woman in the room was currently drowning in a sea of fake smiles, and that he was about to become her only life raft in a storm of silk and ego. The interference was getting worse. A low-frequency hum was beginning to vibrate through the subwoofers, a sound that only a trained ear would catch before it turned into a screeching feedback loop. Daniel knelt by the equipment rack, his brow furrowed as he adjusted the frequency gates. He was a man of logic and physics, and right now, the physics were failing him. Isabella Moreau reached the bottom of the stairs. She was immediately surrounded by a cluster of investors and high society predators. They were leaning into her space, their eyes hungry for a deal, a quote, or a photo. Isabella kept her chin high, her smile a perfect, frozen mask of corporate grace. She had spent the last 3 hours in board meetings defending her new sustainable line, and her mental reserves were at zero. To her, the ballroom felt like a pressurized chamber where the oxygen was being replaced by cologne and expectation. As she stood just a few feet from where Daniel was working, he heard something the others missed. He heard her exhale, a long, shaky breath that signaled a level of exhaustion that went deeper than bone. It was the sound of a person who was one polite sentence away from shattering. Daniel stood up, his tablet in hand, prepared to move to the secondary control booth. He accidentally brushed past the edge of Isabella's group. A man in a sharp tuxedo sneered, stepping back as if Daniel's work jacket might stain his silk. "Careful, mechanic," the man muttered, his tone dripping with an unearned superiority. Daniel didn't flinch. He was used to being treated as part of the architecture. He gave a small, professional nod and started to walk away. But then a hand, slim, cold, and trembling slightly, reached out and caught the sleeve of his jacket. He stopped, turning around in surprise. Isabella Moreau was looking directly at him. She wasn't looking at him like a CEO looks at a technician. She was looking at him with a desperate, silent plea. The Ice Queen mask was cracked, just enough for him to see the panic underneath. "Can you stay next to me for a moment?" Isabella whispered. The words were so quiet they were nearly lost in the chatter of the room. Daniel blinked, his mind still half buried in the audio logs. "Is something wrong with the sound, mademoiselle?" "I'm working on the hum. It should be clear in 2 minutes." Isabella's grip on his sleeve tightened. She ignored the confused looks from the investors around her. "No," she said, her voice regaining a hint of its usual authority but remaining low. "It's not the sound, it's the silence. I need someone who isn't trying to sell me something. I need someone real next to me for 5 minutes. Please, I can't breathe in here." Daniel looked at the group of men in suits. They were watching him with a mixture of confusion and contempt. They saw a nobody interrupting a high-value conversation. But Daniel saw the truth. He saw a young woman who was being suffocated by the very empire she had built. He saw the way she was clutching her clutch bag like it was a shield against a world that demanded too much. He looked at his tablet, then back at her. He thought about Elise. He thought about the times she felt overwhelmed at school and just needed him to hold her hand until the world felt safe again. The CEO of Moreau Couture was older, richer, and more famous. But in that moment, she was just a person who was out of air. "All right," Daniel said, his voice a low, grounding baritone. He didn't offer a bow or a formal greeting. He simply stepped into the circle, standing half a step behind her. He held his tablet like it was a prop, his posture relaxed but steady. The investors looked at each other, baffled. "Isabella?" one of them asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Who is this? Is he part of your security detail? He's a bit casual for the event, don't you think?" Isabella didn't hesitate. She didn't apologize. She felt the steady, calm presence of the man beside her, a man who smelled of industrial soap and coffee instead of expensive jasmine. It grounded her. It gave her the strength to pull the mask back on, but this time the mask was thinner. She could feel her heartbeat slowing down just by standing near his silence. He is the person making sure the world can actually hear us tonight, Arthur, Isabella replied, her eyes flashing with a new kind of defiance. And right now, his perspective is the only one I'm interested in. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a technical matter to discuss. She turned away from the group, pulling Daniel with her toward a quieter corner of the ballroom near the terrace doors. As they moved through the crowd, the whispers followed them like a trail of smoke. Who is he? Is he a new designer? Why is the Ice Queen talking to a worker? Daniel didn't care about the whispers. He focused on the rhythm of Isabella's stride, realizing that the most complex system he had ever had to fix wasn't made of wires. It was made of expectations and a very lonely kind of power. They reached the edge of the stone terrace. The cool Paris night air rushed in through the open doors, carrying the scent of rain and the distant rhythmic hum of the city. The music from the ballroom became a muffled background track, a sound Daniel could finally manage. Isabella let go of his sleeve. She leaned against the marble balustrade, her shoulders finally dropping. She looked out at the Eiffel Tower, its lights blinking in the distance, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Daniel stood a respectful distance away, his hands in his pockets, waiting for the technical error, or the human one, to resolve itself. "Do you come to events like this often?" Isabella finally asked. She didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on the horizon. "Only when something breaks," Daniel replied simply. Isabella turned her head, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. It was the first real expression he had seen on her face all evening. That must be nice, to only be needed when there's a real problem to solve. Most of the people in that room, they don't have problems. They have optics. They have narratives. They have leverage. They haven't solved a real problem in years. They just move papers around and call it progress. "Everything is a system, mademoiselle," Daniel said, his voice a calm anchor in the high-altitude energy of the party. "People, machines, companies. If the inputs don't match the outputs, the system creates noise. Right now, your room is very noisy." Isabella laughed, a light, melodic sound that seemed to surprise even her. "It's a hurricane of noise, Daniel, and I'm supposed to be the eye of the storm. But sometimes I feel like I'm just part of the debris." She looked at his work jacket, noting the name Daniel stitched in white thread over the pocket. "What do you do when you're not fixing the world's noise?" "I go home," Daniel said. "I have a daughter, Elise. She's 9. She's currently obsessed with the idea that the Eiffel Tower is actually a giant radio antenna built by aliens to transmit recipes for space cheese. We have a very important debate scheduled for tomorrow morning about whether or not aliens like croissants or if they prefer baguettes." Isabella's eyes softened. The sharpness of the CEO was replaced by a look of profound, quiet envy. "Elise, that's a beautiful name. Does she know what you do? That you're the one who keeps the music playing?" "She thinks I'm a wizard with wires," Daniel smiled. "She doesn't care about the galas or the CEOs. She just cares that I'm home in time to read the last chapter of her book. To her, I'm the most important person in the world, not because of my title, but because I'm the one who makes her grilled cheese with exactly the right amount of crunch. I think I'd rather have a grilled cheese with Elise than another 5-course meal with the board of directors," Isabella whispered. She began to tell him about the weight of her world. She spoke about taking over the company at 23 after her father's sudden retirement. She spoke about the constant, grueling pressure to be perfect, to be modern, to be Moreau. She realized that she had been surrounded by thousands of people for 3 years, yet none of them had ever asked her a question that didn't involve a profit margin or a stock price. "Everyone talks to my position, Daniel," she said, her voice dropping into a vulnerable register. "They talk to the CEO. They talk to the heiress. They talk to the brand. But they never talk to me. I spend my whole life performing a script that I didn't even write. I'm the lead actress in a play I hate." "Maybe that's because you're the only one who can change the channel," Daniel noted quietly. "And you?" Isabella asked, looking at him with a piercing curiosity. "You were a lead engineer for the festivals, weren't you? I recognize your name from the technical credits of the Opera de Paris archives." Why are you here fixing speaker hums in a hotel? Daniel sighed, looking at his calloused hands. Because I realized that the view from the top of the mountain was very beautiful, but it was also very cold, and it was very far away from my daughter. I had all the success I ever wanted, and I was a stranger to my own family. I moved to the edge because the air is easier to breathe down here. I have less money, less power, and zero fame. But I have every Tuesday afternoon, and that's a deal I'd make again every single day. Isabella was silent for a long time. The jazz music from the ballroom shifted into a slower, more melancholy tempo. She looked at the man beside her, a man who had intentionally chosen less so he could have more of what actually mattered. She realized that she had been looking for a genius in a suit, but she had found a master in a work jacket. A group of photographers started to move toward the terrace, their flashes beginning to pop. The Ice Queen mask began to slide back over Isabella's face, but this time it was different. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked at Daniel. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "The noise is coming back. I don't want you to get caught in it." "I'm a technician, Isabella," Daniel replied with a small, supportive wink. "I know exactly how to handle a surge. Just walk. I'm right here. I'm the grounding wire." As they walked back into the ballroom, the room erupted into a new kind of chaos. But Isabella wasn't drowning anymore. She walked through the flashes and the whispers with a steady, unshakable confidence. She wasn't performing for them. She was moving through them. She had found a grounding wire in the middle of a storm, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was the one in control of the signal. The fundraiser eventually transitioned into the formal dinner phase. The lights dimmed, and the performative energy of the evening reached its peak. Isabella was seated at the head table, surrounded by the city's power brokers and fashion icons. Daniel returned to the shadows, monitoring the audio consoles and ensuring the wireless mics for the speeches didn't drop out. But the connection didn't break. Throughout the speeches and the toasts, Daniel watched her. He saw the way she handled the aggressive questioning from the lead investors. He saw the way she deflected the shallow gossip of the socialites. She was brilliant, yes, but he also saw the small, microscopic signs of fatigue. The way she would grip her wine glass a little too tight, or the way her eyes would drift toward the terrace doors for a split second when the room got too loud. He noticed when she took a sip of water just to hide a sigh. Isabella, for her part, found herself constantly scanning the perimeter of the room. She wasn't looking for her assistants or her PR team. She was looking for the man in the dark jacket. Whenever she found him, standing quietly by a speaker or checking a tablet, she felt a sudden, sharp surge of calm. He was her reminder that there was a world outside the glass, a world of croissants, aliens, and grilled cheese. He was the only real thing in a room made of mirrors. During a brief intermission, Isabella slipped away from her table and found Daniel near the secondary equipment rack in the service corridor. The hallway was empty, the air much cooler than the stifling ballroom. "I heard your response to the trade union questions," Daniel noted as she approached. "That was a very precise frequency. You silenced the room without raising your voice. It was perfect." Isabella laughed, a soft, tired sound. "I was just using your logic, Daniel. I stopped trying to solve them and just started listening to the noise they were making. They didn't want answers. They wanted to be loud. So I gave them a silence they didn't know what to do with. I realized that the loudest people are usually the most insecure." She leaned against the wall, her white dress contrasting sharply with the industrial equipment and gray concrete around them. "You said earlier that you don't have much to lose. Is that true? Truly?" Daniel paused, his hand on a fader. "In this room? Yes. I don't care about the contracts or the social standing. My value isn't attached to anything in this building. If I leave tonight and never come back, my life doesn't change one bit. I still have a lease. I still have my records. I still have the truth. And that's the ultimate luxury." Isabella looked at him with a profound, heavy respect. "I've spent my whole life being afraid of losing my position. I thought that if I stopped being the CEO, I'd stop being anyone. I thought my name was my skin, but watching you tonight, I realized that your position is the only one that actually has any power. You're the only person in this hotel who is actually free. Freedom is just a choice of which system you want to belong to, Isabella, Daniel said softly. Then I think I've been choosing the wrong one for a very long time, she replied. She reached out and touched the metal of the equipment rack, feeling the vibration of the music from the other side of the wall. Thank you for standing next to me. It made the air feel real. The gala began to wind down. The last of the high-stakes donations were announced, and the guests began to filter out toward their waiting limousines. Isabella was required to stand by the entrance to say her final goodbyes. Daniel began to pack up his gear, the familiar clink of cables and the thud of road cases providing a satisfying end to his night. He felt a strange sense of loss, realizing the magic of the evening was coming to a close. Daniel! He turned around, his hands deep inside a cable crate. Isabella was standing in the service hallway. The white dress was slightly rumpled now. Her hair was a bit loose, and she had taken off her high-heeled shoes, holding them in one hand like a discarded weapon. She looked exhausted, real, and incredibly beautiful in the dim, fluorescent light of the staff corridor. The Ice Queen had officially left the building. The hum is gone, Daniel noted, gesturing toward the empty ballroom. The system is clear. Isabella walked toward him, her footsteps silent on the concrete floor. Earlier tonight, when I asked you to stay next to me, I told you it was because I needed someone who wasn't trying to sell me something. I told you I needed someone normal. She stopped a few feet from him, her eyes searching his in the quiet of the tunnel. But I think I was lying. To myself, mostly. Daniel waited, the hum of the nearby service elevator the only sound between them. I didn't need someone impressive, Daniel, Isabella said, her voice steady and clear. I needed someone who could see me. Not the dress, not the company, and not the bank account. I needed someone who knew that the most important thing in the world is a Tuesday afternoon with a 9-year-old girl and a debate about space cheese. Daniel gave a small, humble nod. I think that's the most important thing, too. Everything else is just background noise. Isabella smiled, a wide, genuine expression that lit up the gray hallway. Would you like to have dinner with me sometime, Daniel? Without the crowd? Without the tuxedos or the photographers? Maybe somewhere that serves grilled cheese and doesn't know what a quarterly report is. Daniel was surprised. He looked at the heavy equipment case, then back at the billionaire heiress standing barefoot in a service tunnel. He realized then that he hadn't just fixed a sound system tonight. He had helped a person find their own voice in a world that wanted to silence it. He laughed, a warm, rich sound that echoed off the concrete. That sounds a lot easier than fixing a 3-phase power surge, Isabella. But I have to warn you, my supervisor is very strict about my dinner companions. You'll have to pass the croissant alien test first, and she's a very tough judge. Isabella laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. I'll start studying the alien migration patterns immediately. As Daniel stepped into the service elevator and the doors closed, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had come to the hotel to fix a small technical error, but he was leaving with a beginning. He realized that for the first time in years, he was excited about something that had nothing to do with a circuit board. He walked out of the service entrance and into the cool Paris night, his toolkit over his shoulder. The city was waking up, the first light of dawn painting the rooftops in shades of pink and gray. He walked toward the metro station, realizing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone isn't to fix their problems. It's to simply stand next to them until they remember how to breathe. The single dad and the CEO didn't end with a merger or a headline. It ended with a simple, honest connection between two people who had finally stopped performing. Daniel Laurent walked home toward his daughter, no longer a ghost in the shadows, but a man standing in the light of a brand new day. True value is not found in the titles we hold or the wealth we display, but in the integrity of our presence. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who has nothing to prove. Never underestimate the impact of being real. It might just be the one thing someone else has been searching for their entire life. If you believe that real connection matters more than social status, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me in the comments, would you stay if someone just needed you to be real? Have you ever found a true friend in the most unexpected place?